Good morning, everybody. It's a bright, beautiful, glorious day. Also, the last day of my vacation. It goes by so quickly, and I still have a lot of vacation time left, so I may do a little traveling yet this year before the weather turns cold. It's funny, the last couple of times I get started, my throat gets a little hoarse. Must be allergies or pollen or something in the air. We've had quite a bit this year, more so than other years. I think it's because of the late spring. But anyway, at least the heat is broken and we got some beautiful weather. Enjoying my last day home, and I thought I had a few minutes this morning, and I thought I'd make some time for a video. Unlike Lloyd Evans, and it's quite obvious, he does a professional quality job on his videos. I'm trying to do my best. I'm not a very tech savvy person, and it does take a lot of time if you really want to put together a high quality video. It's a lot of work, and he really has an artistic knack for that, and my level of artistic talent is limited to stick figures, and even that's a challenge for me. And the ironic part is that my wife and my daughters are all artists, professional artists. I guess I'm more the technical person myself, but anyway, I'm the one putting these videos together, and I guess in some way I could have done it a little bit more organized, but what the heck? I'm getting the information out, and I think it's important. I think the history is important. I personally always found history fascinating, especially family history. Where did we come from? When I was a young man, I remember shortly after my grandfather died, my paternal grandfather, I went down and stayed with my grandmother a month in Florida. Now, I happened to have had a work injury that kept me out of work for a month. Bad knee. And so I gave me the opportunity to go down and stay with her shortly, weeks after my grandfather passed away, and be with her. And I got a chance to ask her a lot of questions about my dad, my family, her family, what her childhood was like, my grandfather, as much information as I could get. I didn't record any of this. I didn't write it down. I kept it in my memory to the best I can, which means it's slowly being lost over the years as I forget things, which is on the increase, I think, losing my memory. But anyway, I thought of a couple of things this morning that I didn't touch on during the first parts of the series that I've been putting on. And during Russell's life, he was really the first. Well, maybe William Miller could be the first well-known preacher in the U.S. The Jerry Falwells, the Jim Bakkers, the what's his name, Osteen, that I can't stand that guy's phoniness. He's such a phony. Benny Hinn, a phony. All these phonies out there. I love that movie, Religulous. Actually, Religulous really was meant as a comedy in a sense, but there was so much truth. The old saying, "Many a truth is said in jest." There goes my throat again. Don't know what it is. I was fine until I started this. It's God trying to prevent me from blaspheming. But Religulous had a big impact on me. I mean, I was sort of at a crossroads at that time when the movie came out, and I was really in the throes of questioning, and I think that may have been the tipping point for me. Plus the fact that Bill Maher he grew up in the town next to me. We're only about a year or two apart in age. He's probably a year younger than me. I played his high school in basketball. We scrimmaged. We didn't actually. I was in New York State, so we didn't really play official games against New Jersey teams. But the New Jersey, because we were right on the New Jersey border, our basketball team would scrimmage with with close nearby schools, and Park Ridge was right there. So that's where Bill Maher grew up. Now, he didn't play basketball, and I never met him, but he and I frequented the same places as teenagers. There's no question. So there's like the Burger King in Park Ridge was a favorite place we all went to. There was a lot. The bowling alley in Park Ridge we hung out at. I mean, I could have crossed paths with him and not known it. I mean, there were a lot of night hangouts as a teenager that I went to in my early 20s. We probably did cross paths. Although he went to college right away and I didn't. So anyway, but yeah, Religulous did have an impact on me, and what he said in that movie made so much sense to me. And it's funny, people cite Christopher Hitchens and as Richard Dawkins, Daniel Denton, Sam Harris as being the big influence. It was Bill Maher for me, and I guess maybe it's because of that connection. But anyway, I got to thinking about, I mean, again, like I said in my last video, there's so much that could be said that was missed. And I'm going to try and cover a little of that in this video. Now, famous people. The Jehovah's Witnesses today have drawn in some people that have become huge public figures, major stars. The Jackson family, Michael Jackson. And I understand that some of them, like the old man who's got them all started, Joe Jackson, was a tough son of a bitch, but he and the wife were devout Jehovah's Witnesses, and they raised their kids Jehovah's Witness. I think Michael was expelled, but back in the 80s, when he was a superstar, there were a lot, I believe a lot of young Jehovah's Witnesses were drawn to him as they were to Prince today. They're proud of that connection. And so today there was Prince, who recently passed away. Even Lloyd Evans made a video about Prince because of the popularity he had. You know, when Jehovah's Witnesses have somebody who's wildly popular in the world, you know, they kind of take them in. You know, there other popular Jehovah or well-known Jehovah's Witnesses like the Venus Williams and Serena, the tennis players, and throughout the movement's history, there were prominent figures. Now, today, music and sports figures become the idols. In a different era, in Russell's era, they didn't have the arts dominating people's attention so much. We didn't have television or radio, or they had theater, but not everybody could go to the theater. By the end of Russell's life, movies were beginning to become entertainment. They were novel. That's why the photodrama was so strange, because it was cutting edge technology at the time, and so it drew. It was a curio. It was something that was an oddity, and people went to see it not because of the subject matter so much, but for the technology, to see a person move on a film and capture that movement, and actually see his lips move and sync with the record. That was really something, even if it was only a minute or two clip at a time. The rest of it was magic lantern slides, but that was cutting edge technology, the photodrama, even though what they were being fed was bunk. And I don't know how many, they claim 9 million people viewed the photodrama, but certainly 9 million people didn't join the Bible students at the time. So, as a witnessing tool, the Bible students thought it was a great accomplishment, achievement for them. I guess it was, but the thing is, it didn't really bolster their ranks too terribly much. There were a number of people that were converted, but again, not many, because the message wasn't one that, give up all your earthly belongings and join us. It's not a popular message. Even in those days, people didn't have much. It was, 1914, most people didn't have very many luxuries, but whatever creature comforts they had, they weren't really necessarily ready to give them up for complete sacrifice to an unseen God. Anyway, their religion didn't make such demands on them, so they were perfectly happy remaining in the religion of their birth. But there were people who were drawn in, and famous people who would have been heroes at that time. I will present a few. One was Alexander P. Stuart. Now, Alexander P. Stuart was a Civil War general for the Confederacy, and he was the last lieutenant general to live. Now, the rank of lieutenant general was the highest rank one could achieve in the Army in those days. The only lieutenant general before the Civil War was Washington, George Washington, and they restored the rank. Especially in the Union, there was only one lieutenant general, and that was Ulysses S. Grant. Down in the Confederacy, there were several lieutenant generals: Lee, Thomas Jackson, even Bedford, Nathan Bedford Forrest was a lieutenant general at one point. There were only several. I think fighting Joe Johnson, who was the general who Stuart interacted with the most. Stuart was a Civil War general from the southwestern theater and fought in Tennessee, Mississippi, that area of the Civil War. They called these different areas theaters. There was the Eastern Theater that was mostly fought in Virginia, and the Western Theater that was fought mostly in Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Not so much in Texas. There were some battles in Texas, even New Mexico, but for the most part, the Western Theater took place along the Mississippi, the states that bordered the Mississippi. And Alexander P. Stuart, he was an important figure in the Civil War during that in that arena of the war, the Western Theater. I couldn't tell you a whole lot about what battles he won or not, but he was the last of the lieutenant generals to live. And in his later years, I understand that he he resided in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I think in St. Louis in the summertime and the wintertime he stayed in Biloxi. He got a hold of some of Russell's materials, became interested. He was in his 80s, I believe, when he converted, and I think Russell baptized him. I am not certain about this, but I do know that when he was a Bible student for several years of his life, I think the last 4 years or so of his life, and when Stuart died, the funeral was held in St. Louis, where I believe Stuart is buried now. Russell got word of the death of Stuart, and they were holding a convention in Hull, Ohio at the time, and Russell left the convention. Now he was going to give the eulogy to Stuart, and this was a perfect opportunity. The movement was on the cusp of expanding its scope of work. They were talking about moving to Brooklyn by this point. They were gaining numbers, and they had thousands of newspapers in which Russell's sermons were syndicated on Sunday issues, and so this was a big deal. The death of Stuart, and it would get national coverage, national attention, and so there was no doubt Russell was going to take advantage of this situation, and so he left the convention. In the middle of the convention, hopped a train, and he gave the eulogy, and it was recorded. We got some jet ski out there making noise. those guys getting noisier every year. But yeah, this was a major publicity opportunity for Russell, and there was no way that he was going to give it up. People talk about Russell and how spiritual he was, and how his mind was only on the heavenly things. And come on, let's face it. I mean, this guy, he was about growing the thing that he was interested in, which was making the Watchtower, making a name for the Watchtower, making a name for the Bible students movement, and for himself. And that's true too. I mean, there were cartoons with Russell deriding higher criticism, he called it, or the educated, the universities and so on. And I mean, he was made fool of in the trial, where he was alleged by the Brooklyn Eagle to not know ancient Greek, and they asked him to in the court, apparently, to recite the Greek alphabet, and he couldn't do it, and so he was embarrassed. He said, "Well, Professor Strong's has done all the work for us, and we don't need to know the Greek alphabet. We don't need to know ancient Greek to know what the meanings of the individual words are, because Professor Strong has done that for us." But he was embarrassed. He only had a 7th grade education, and it's interesting that when somebody of high educational status or of public notoriety like A.P. Stewart, Russell put these people close to him because their accomplishments, their publicity would be associated with him, would rub off on him. And this was done in several circumstances. And I can think of another individual who Russell attached to pretty quickly, who was very famous in his day, and that was William Preeble Hall. Now, William Preeble Hall was the Adjutant General of the United States Army. He reported to General Blackjack Pershing, who was a very famous U.S. general. He was the most senior general in the United States Army at the turn of the century. He led an expedition against Mexico. I think it was around 1904 or 5. Was the first expedition in which automobiles and an airplane were used. It was not used for fighting, but for reconnaissance. William Preeble Hall became famous as an Indian fighter, as a person who, quote unquote, tamed the West. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for murdering 35 Native Americans who apparently surrounded some of his men. He came in and saved them, killing 35 of the Indians who attacked his soldiers. And he was a great Indian fighter, and was awarded the Medal of Honor for that action, and no doubt a national hero. He rose to the rank of Adjutant General of the United States, which is a very important position, because the job is to make sure that there are sufficient number of soldiers to defend the United States, in time of in whatever circumstances of war that the United States may find itself in. So the adjutant general makes sure that the army is equipped with the proper equipment, the latest equipment, the best equipment to fight wars with. And so it was a pretty high position. And you can see here that he was proud of that position. Look at that fancy uniform with all the medals. And no doubt one of those medals is a Medal of Honor. And he looks like a Napoleon there almost, in a way. And, this photo was taken. He was a Bible student before he gave up the position. He died in 1927. He was adjutant general of the U.S. Army until 1912, and he was associated with Russell. He was on Russell's travel committee. He was one of the members of Russell's travel committee in 1910. I can't exactly remember what year William Preeble Hall became a Bible student, but he was a Bible student for a number of years before he had given up his position as adjutant general of the U.S. Army. So here was another person of very high profile that Russell put very close to him. You don't hear of Hall much or at all, during Rutherford's era. He kind of took a back seat. I guess because of Rutherford's abhorring creature worship and honoring people who had accomplishments. So I think maybe Hall took a back seat because of that. But not with Russell. He was very close to Russell. And he shows up in a number of photographs, like this one. This is a photograph of Russell and his travel committee. Now, I don't have I wasn't able to search it out well enough to get the full photo, but this photograph is found in other places on the internet, and the names of each individual is given. And you can see somebody circled William Preeble Hall's head right behind Russell. Now, notice this. Here's the king sitting on his throne with his most important men standing right behind him. And these were people who had titles of doctor and professor. If you find this photograph online with the names, I don't know these or of these individuals very well, but most of them were people of a high degree of accomplishment from worldly terms, with doctorates. William Preeble Hall was the gold medal Indian killer, and there were professors, and so Russell liked to surround himself with men of high accomplishment, and that's very evident, and you could see that rubbing off on him. And here they are behind their king on the throne. So you could see that all of this has gone to Russell's head to some extent. He's the Laodicean messenger. He's the wise and faithful servant, and these are his important aides. And it's funny because when you read accounts of some of these travels, like in the Laodicean messenger, it sounded like some of these round the world travels were travesties. That events were supposedly coordinated ahead of time, But when they got there, they found out there was no event venue, or there there was, some calamity that prevented what was planned to take place. And of course, it was all the Lord's overruling and this and that. But it seemed like, while these guys were important and title, they're probably used to having people do things for them rather than them being the doers. And being the doers for the first time, they weren't very competent. But you have to read those accounts for yourself. And I think that there was one account in the Laodicean Messenger. Now, you got to remember, the Laodicean Messenger is the syrupy, sappy, over-the-top tribute to Russell. So when you read this thing, what comes through, you read between the lines, and you see what comes through is the truth. Like the time when Russell was gone for 4 months in Europe, and he returned back to the Bethel, and he wanted to inspect the condition of the Bethel home. And so the person in charge of, I guess, the kitchen had taken him downstairs and showed him what kitchen provisions they had, and he showed him, I guess, their stockpile of potatoes. I guess potatoes were good, cheap food to feed the Bethel family with. And the first thing Russell said was, "How much did you pay for these potatoes?" And the individual replied, "I paid such and such amount, maybe 4 cents a pound." And Russell shot back immediately, "You paid too much." Now, the interpretation of this circumstance was the omniscience of Russell. He was gone in Europe for 4 months. How could he know the price of potatoes? But his ever-seeing eye was nothing was lost to him, and so he knew, he was aware of even the most trivial thing, the price of potatoes and how much they should have paid. And that brother got chastised for paying too much for potatoes. Well, he was just being a son of a bitch, and he didn't know for the first thing what the price of a potato was. Maybe the potatoes had gone up while he was gone in price, and this poor brother had no choice but to pay that price. And Russell's going on false information and just being a jerk about the whole situation. But instead, no, he puts this poor guy on the spot. No doubt this guy is really upset because the Laodicean messenger is now angered by him, or disrupted, or upset. And I mean, that tells you something about Russell. This picture tells you something about Russell. Look at just this picture. You don't even have to know who these people are. You don't have to know that they're doctors and professors and gold medal generals standing behind him. You just see this, and you can see the king on his throne. And so by this period of Russell's ministry, he already had grandiose visions for the work that was to be done by the Watchtower Society. So maybe Macmillan, Van Amberg, and Rutherford were not wrong. Maybe the Bible students had the wrong idea of who Russell really was. And that I think is the case. So now, moving on from the king to another person that I think you all would know. Boy, what a dear sweetheart she is. Look at that. Look at the wonderful collar. She's everybody's mom. Look at the hair, the glasses, the loving smile. but you have no idea who this is. Well, maybe some people do. When I talk about famous people, this is the mother of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the five-star general who coordinated the joint military invasion of D-Day, the British and the coordinated British and American invasion of France, Normandy, and later President of the United States of America, two-term President of the United States of America. Yes, they were Bible students. She became interested. Ida Stover Eisenhower became interested in the Bible students in the 1890s, and they began holding meetings in their home in 1895 when Eisenhower was a boy, and so he grew up knowing the Bible students. He spent a lot of his youth growing up in the Bible students, attending meetings, but in the very early years of the Bible students movement. Later, he was appointed. I guess he got the recommendation to go to West Point. I think you need a recommendation from somebody of note or position, like a senator or something, to get admitted into West Point. But Eisenhower was admitted and did quite well, and moved on from there. But throughout his life, I think as a president, he kind of gravitated to Methodism, sort of a harmless religion. But darn well he knew what the Watchtower was. He knew what I wonder if he didn't even have Hoover watching them or getting information about them. That would be interesting to know what Eisenhower may have done. Or maybe he just didn't care. I don't know. But certainly he did not take to the Bible student message. He did not take to the Watchtower. His mother did, and she remained a Bible student, I believe, for a while she was actually a Jehovah's Witness. She died, I believe, in the 1930s. I'm going to have to confirm that. Just 1 second. Okay, I can't find my... Yes, she died in 1946. So she was quite elderly. She was born in 1862, and so she was well into her 80s when she passed away, and she was a Jehovah's Witness. Now I actually saw a daily heavenly manna. Now, if I don't know if anybody knows this, but these were daily texts that were read, a calendar in booklet form with a text written by Russell for thoughts on the day. And they were permanent books. They didn't go by year, they just went by day. And so you could keep this book year in and year out. One page you had the date and the text, and on the other page you had for information, like people would sign. It was lined, blank lined page, and you would have somebody sign the manna, and they put their name, their address, their birthday, and you could send them birthday cards on their birthday and so on. And this was something that was adopted back by the early Bible students movement. They continued it. The Dawn printed the daily heavenly manna for as long as I could remember as a kid. That was a part of everybody's life. we'd start every day by reading the manna text, and then they had something that the Dawn published. It wasn't something that Russell came up with. They called them Songs in the Night, and they had the same idea. You read a text before you went to bed. But the Daily Manna was Daily Heavenly Manna was a publication by the Watchtower in the early days of the Bible student movement. And so Bible students all had these things, especially the sisters, and they would get people to sign them. And I actually went to somebody's home up in Buffalo. Bible student family. My father was serving as an elder at a convention. He was giving a talk at the Bible Students Buffalo Convention in the 1980s. My wife was pregnant with our first daughter, so we were only married about 2 years at the time, and we stayed at these brethren's home, and she had a manna that was given to her by an old-time sister with the signature of Ida Stover Eisenhower, and so we saw that. She got around in Bible student circles. Now, Eisenhower was born in 1890, and they began having meetings in their home around 1895. So he was 5 years old when they really got involved in the Bible students. So, yeah, say he was 18 years old when he went to college, West Point. That's 13 years exposure to the Bible students movement, the Bible students in the Watchtower. And so there's no question that that Eisenhower may have met Russell, knew of him definitely, knew of the Watchtower, knew of Rutherford, and knew the whole business. And I guess he wanted nothing of it. But his mother was she was devoted to the Watchtower to the day she died. She did not leave the Watchtower to join the Bible students after Rutherford started the Jehovah's Witnesses. She became a Jehovah's Witness and stayed loyal to the society until she died in 1946. So these were just, now at the time, certainly, well, in 1946, her son was indeed famous. He was famous during the Second World War, but nowhere near as famous as he became later when he was president of the United States. So she wasn't alive at that time, but. These are interesting side notes of important people, historically important people. Some rather dubious. I mean, obviously, A.P. Stuart supported slavery and being a Confederate general. Which was an awful institution. William Preeble Hall killed Indians, Native Americans. We stole this land from them. So he didn't care about these things. That gives you insight into Russell's mind, that these things didn't matter. Either that or he forgave them. God forgave these people and gave them the truth. I don't know. But anyway, I thought we'd move on a little bit to the man himself, Judge Rutherford. And why do we call him Judge? Well, he liked him. He liked the title. He wanted to be called Judge. He was born in 1869. He was somewhat younger than Russell, who was born in 1852. And he was born on a farm in Missouri to a pretty stern Baptist father. And as he got older, he wanted to become a lawyer, wanted to go to college, and his father was not in favor of that. He would lose important farm work. So he made an arrangement with his father that he would pay for his college and he would pay for a laborer to take his place at the farm while he went to college. So he took up college and also became an encyclopedia salesman door to door to support not only himself and his college, but also to pay for his replacement worker for his father. So, if anything, you gotta say that the guy had a bit of a tough life to start with, and he was driven. He was not going to fail. He was going to succeed, and he did succeed. And apparently, as the story goes, when he did become a lawyer, he was in practice with somebody. It was in the early 1890s. I think it was around 1894. And some coal porters came by the office, and his partner was ready to send them out. And he said, no, let me listen to them. And he was thinking back to the time when he did door-to-door sales of encyclopedias, and so he wanted to, I don't know, return a favor, I guess. And so he bought a couple of books from them. I believe one of them was a first volume, and these books sat on his shelf for a while before he actually picked them up and read them. And apparently Russell resonated with him, and that's how he became a follower and then convert to the Bible students. From his first contact with the Bible students, that was around 1894, and he was baptized in 1907. So that was quite a span of time before he actually committed himself to consecrated life as a Bible student. Both he and his wife. Now, his wife Mary. And they had a son by that point too. When he had become baptized in 1907, and it was that year. Oh, you know what? Actually, he became counsel of the Watchtower in 1907. I think he was baptized in 1906. I believe that's. I think I'm off a year. But he was baptized around 1906 and became counsel of the Watchtower in 1907. So he rose very quickly to the upper echelons of the Watchtower, very, very quickly, within a year of his baptism. But he had known of what Russell called the truth for many years, since 1894. And the reason they call him judge is that for some period he served as an alternate judge, circuit court judge in Missouri. And I think he heard maybe one or two cases as an alternate. for a circuit court judge, and so he he wasn't a real judge in the fullest sense. But the fact is that he did have some experience in trying cases as a judge. I think in two circumstances, and I'm not sure how important these were. They may have been a matter of my neighbor stole my chicken sort of thing. But he really loved the title Judge Rutherford, and that's what he was known as from that point on, the Judge Rutherford. One of my favorite pictures is this one. This photo was taken at the time he entered Atlanta Federal Penitentiary with the 6 other directors of the Watchtower Society for the subversive act of speaking out against the First World War and the U.S. involvement in the war in the pages of the 7th volume. I think Rutherford may have at one point regretted that, including those words. In fact, actually, they did strike a compromise with the government. I think when he was paroled, to remove the subversive material, or what was considered to be subversive. They had been the board of directors had been found guilty of breaking the Sedition Act, which was passed during the First World War, and I had spoken all about that before. But here is probably a photograph that Rutherford didn't want to have taken. It's funny that none of the pictures of Rutherford show him smiling. I think there may be 1 or 2 photographs of him smiling, but most of them show him. He doesn't look like a happy person in most photographs. He certainly doesn't look happy here. One thing I noticed, though, that looks prominent, he's got that bald spot, and he's got that little patch of hair in the front. That kind of strange. Also, that bump on the bridge of his nose, I don't know what that is, if that was permanent. It doesn't show on any other photograph, but it shows in both the frontal and profile photographs here. I don't know if he had that surgically removed later on. Maybe that was a fatty tumor. I don't know. Maybe it was just a temporary thing. But it does stand out prominently in this photograph. And his fingerprints are there. He was fingerprinted for life. But they did have they were paroled, and then they did have their convictions overturned. I believe it was considered a violation of the First Amendment. But it was all done after the United States was out of the war. So anyway, I just wanted to get in a little bit about the judge himself and why they call him Judge Rutherford. He really wasn't a judge. He practiced law, but he did serve as an alternate as a circuit court judge, and did listen to at least one case as a judge. And so he took up the moniker of Judge Rutherford. So those are some interesting little factoids, I guess, of people. There are probably others that I don't know about. These are some that that I came across along the way that I found interesting in my exploration of the heritage of my religion, or not my religion anymore, but the religion that I was born and raised in. And so I found them interesting, and I think they are interesting little ideas. Russell was a man of his day. He did not have progressive ideas. He was not an abolitionist. He was not a person who supported women's rights. He called his wife poisoned with the suffragette movement. He was really not an open-minded person at all, and I don't think his heart was pervaded with love for his brotherhood of man. I think he found something. He was a religious nut, obsessed with the Bible, and thought that he found the truth, and started a religious movement. He had money, and he began a movement. I think he wanted to see it thrive. I would think he wanted to see it grow into something big. And I don't think Russell was beyond changing doctrine to make that happen. I think that's evident with what Macmillan said. I think that's evident with what happened. Rutherford being put into the position by people who, like Macmillan, like Van Amberg, who believed that the organization should grow. I think they had the same vision as Russell. And they realized that Rutherford was the man who could make it happen, because he needed, especially with a movement who idolized Russell so much. I mean, they basically worshipped the man. Even in my day, growing up, all you heard was Pastor Russell this, Pastor Russell that, Pastor said this, Brother Russell said that. You knew somebody was not in the truth if they called him Russell. And that was a big giveaway. He was Brother Russell or Pastor Russell. Like I said previously in talks, people would quote from the reprints as commonly as they would from the Bible. So there was something else I wanted to talk about, and that was during the Rutherford reign of terror. I kind of think of Rutherford as sort of the Stalin of the Bible students movement. You had the visionary Lenin, and then when Lenin died, you had the awful dictator take over, Joseph Stalin. There's so much of that happens. Stalin was an associate of Lenin. Rutherford was an associate of Russell. They picked these people, and then they come in, and then they transform the beginnings. There's this great idealism, and then the pragmatist comes in, the Brigham Young, the Rutherford, the Joseph Stalin, and the pathology of it is that they cut off the part of the movement that doesn't go along with the changes. And in Rutherford's case, that meant 75% of the original Bible student movement by the late 20s. And I had presented some of the statistics. William Schnell had done some of the research. Paul Grundy has some data online that supports that. I found some data that supported that, at least in the Pilgrim speaking list. And Rutherford was not an endearing man. He was not someone that people cozied up to or So he was like the snapping turtle. You gotta be very wary about where you put your hands because you'll get your fingers snapped. Uh, he was a pugnacious, driven man who had a vision and was patient enough to make that vision come true. And he spared nobody. Nobody was spared. You got on board, uh, and if you didn't, you were out. That was it. It was as simple as that. You either said yes, sir, and were on board with him, or you were out the door, and it was final. And in one particular instance, uh, it was somebody who was pretty high up in the organization, Olin Moyle. During the 1930s, Olin Moyle, who was a very good lawyer, one of the top lawyers in the United States at the time, was a Bible student, became a Jehovah's Witness, was loyal to the Watchtower, and came to Bethel. So, sold off his practice, closed his practice, sold his home. They had a son, Peter. They moved to Brooklyn, and he began some very important cases. At that time, there were some issues about the flag, saluting the flag. Rutherford had made it an edict that that was worshiping our country by pledging allegiance, and so the Pledge of Allegiance was out for Bible students or for Jehovah's Witnesses, as well as saluting the flag, putting your hand over your heart when you give the pledge. That was all creature worship to Rutherford, and that was out. And it became a Supreme Court case, and there were a number of instances where people were getting hurt, children in particular, because this affected them because it was morning practice, even as when I was a child, to pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That'll be impregnated and burned into my mind forever. We used to have morning prayer when I was a kid too. That got abolished. I think it was Madeline. I forget. She was kind of a obnoxious person, atheist down in Texas. Got the saluting or the morning prayers out of school, as it should have been. You shouldn't be mixing religion with public-funded institutions. But anyway, that's beyond the point. Olin Moyle was a very good lawyer, took on some very important cases for the Watchtower, and I think he served in that position for about 4 years, and he was shocked, both he and his wife. Now, the thing about Olin Moyle was he was a teetotaler, and Rutherford was not. And he was shocked at the conditions at Bethel. And he wrote a letter. I guess he decided that the situation was so bad with Rutherford, and he held Rutherford responsible for the circumstances, for the environment of the being head of the president of the organization. He was responsible for the environment that was created at Bethel, which included alcohol. He called it a worshiping of alcohol or something like that. It was a strong language. I have the letter. I have to pull it up. But yeah, he and his wife were appalled at the language that Rutherford used. Apparently he upbraided Clayton Woodworth very severely, calling him names. I think it may have gotten physical. It wouldn't be beyond me that Rutherford could be physical. And the language he used, apparently there was he used swearing. Apparently these were things that they didn't think were Christian-like. The alcohol, the everything that Rutherford was doing and permitting at the Watchtower, and apparently there was something where it says that Rutherford conceded, "There's nothing we can do with Moyle, but we can make a man out of his son Peter." So they were going to work on his son, and I tell you, if somebody was going to do that to my kid, I'd be fighting mad. And so I could understand Moyle's position. Now Moyle may have been a little bit too much of a, too pure, maybe, I don't know, but the thing is that he didn't like the circumstances. They were not what he expected for Bethel, and he resigned, and he wrote a letter of resignation offering to stay until September 1, and when they would find a replacement for him. And then he offered to continue on the cases that he was working on, the important cases that he was working on. They were in the Supreme Court, I believe, at the time. And so that there was no break. I understand Rutherford took those. He was outraged when he got the letter. Now, the letter was a public letter. It was not given to Rutherford privately. This was Luther's 95 Theses. This was posted and given to everybody publicly. He wanted to reform the Watchtower. Moyle was incensed at the conditions that were existing. Now, he didn't mention anything about the beliefs, so he was fine with what they were teaching. It was the character, the activities that were going on, what the permissiveness of Rutherford in terms of vices, drinking and swearing and so on. And that is what Moyle took issue with. And Rutherford thought he was a prude, was outraged, and told him to get out immediately. And they did. I think they were heading to vacation anyway at the time he was leaving. Moyle had a lawsuit later, after Rutherford's death. I think there was something that was printed by Franz and Nathan Knorr in the Watchtower later that alluded to or referred to Moyle, and he issued a libel suit. I think they settled out of court, but there was bad blood between Moyle and the Watchtower. No doubt, he was disfellowshipped and thrown out of the religion. My mother knew Edna Moyle. Now, Edna, she was of my mom's generation. She married the son of Olin Moyle, Peter Moyle. Edna was Peter's wife, and Edna, I remember her. I kind of recall her being somewhat odd, strange, but it's hard for me to remember very clearly. But I do know that she was a friend of my mother's. Now, if anybody was a friend of my mother's, they had to be a little bit on the odd side, because my mother was very strange. I think my mother had schizophrenia. My brother was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I think there's a genetic link to schizophrenia that they know about that has been. I guess there's a genetic factor that makes a person at higher risk for schizophrenia. And I think my brother was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I think my mother, she had to have it. She was really out there. She had mostly she lived in some sort of a fantasy world. It was a very strange. She was not connected to reality. She lived in her own little world. It was very strange, and I had a hard time growing up with that. But that's besides the point. She was. I mean, again, these were connections. I mean, I could have asked Edna if I had known anything about the circumstances. I knew this person. There was this resource right there. I didn't know what role she played in witness history and watchtower history, Bible student history, but she was a Bible student, and she attended New York class. She attended all the conventions. She. I think now Olin went his own way. I think he cut ties altogether with anything remotely associated with the Bible students. He connected with David Horowitz and became I think something that advocated Israel and the establishment and the support of Israel as a state, I believe. But anyway, he did not continue with the Watchtower or the Bible students after his infamous letter, which I'm going to see if I can put up, or at least, you know what I'll do is I'll link to it. Yeah, that's what I'll do instead. I'll just put a link to it. There's no way that I can really put the full letter on the video and make it so that you can read it. I urge you to read it. It's an interesting letter. It gives you insight, at least somebody's perspective of Rutherford as a human being, which wasn't very positive. It was a very negative view, and I'm sure that there was some truth to that perspective. Of course, you gotta remember that if Rutherford was so repugnant that nobody would work with him, so there must have been people with whom Rutherford could work effectively. I mean, he wasn't a complete maniac by any means. He was a dictator. What he had to say went. But at the same time, there must be. I mean, he couldn't continue the operations of the Watchtower if he was such a bad manager that things would fall apart. So there were people who worked with him, people who supported him, people who who kept things going and believed that he should be there. I mean, if he was that awful, then everybody would be like Olin Moyle, and something would have happened. Either the movement would have fallen apart, or they would have ousted him somehow, a coup d'etat of some sort. Who knows? But something would have happened. But nothing did. Was he that intimidating? I don't know. I know that I wouldn't like him. I wouldn't like him at all. I think he was a psychopath. I think he fit all of the characteristics of a psychopath. And I think maybe Olin Moyle was very sensitive to that. And so, not realizing what Rutherford was, he believed that a man could be reformed. But you can't reform a psychopath. And Rutherford reacted as expected. He apparently took over the case and lost it miserably. And that was some sense of poetic justice there, that the great Joseph Rutherford lost the case. I bet you Moyle would have won it. Now, Covington later on did win the case, and they got, I believe in the 40s, Hayden Covington, who took Olin Moyle's place. Now, Covington apparently idolized Rutherford. And so there was a pretty big contrast there between Covington and Moyle, who found Rutherford rather repugnant. So, but again, Hayden Covington was disfellowshipped for alcoholism in the early 60s. And so, the one-time vice president found himself disfellowshipped for almost 20 years before they reinstated him. But he never lost his devotion to Rutherford. Hayden Covington won many important cases. He became one of the premier Supreme Court lawyers. I think he won more cases in the Supreme Court than any other individual. Certainly the Watchtower, I think they had an 80% success rate. They won a tremendous number of Supreme Court cases over First Amendment cases. Now, they weren't doing it for the benefit of the freedom of speech and freedom of religion, but these court cases that the Watchtower brought and won benefited a lot more than just the Watchtower. So they did, but they weren't doing it out of like the Civil Liberties Union for the benefit of people. They were doing it for their own preservation, their own rights to be able to publish the witness of the kingdom. So, but anyway, that I think pretty much ends Rutherford. All of the Bible student history that is connected with the Watchtower from the 1930s on, the split occurred. And next time I will pick up on the Bible students' story. What happened to the Bible students who were disenfranchised from Watchtower? Those that found themselves ousted by Rutherford, the 75% who of the original movement were gone by 1928. There were actually, it was there were Bible students that were leaving Watchtower throughout the 30s into the early 40s, and the work that the Dawn did was really focused on gathering those disenfranchised together and trying to reach out to those within the organization, within the Watchtower, who didn't know where else to go, and to touch them, to give them the chance to come back and become Bible students again, and many did. I mean, I noticed Jack Macaulay, for example, was on the ordained ministers list until just before Rutherford died. Jack Macaulay was an elder in my class growing up. He was an awful man too. Hated kids. He was a bachelor. The Cyclemian stayed with the society for a long time before he became a Bible student. And so there were still many who were in the organization who didn't like what was going on, but didn't know where else to go, and stayed because of Russell, the legacy of Russell. But the Dawn did reach out to these people through the Frank and Ernest program, and many did leave the Witnesses and join the new coalescing Bible students movement under the Dawn. And I think the Dawn was very, very successful. You could that chart that I put up in my last video showed that there were about 90,000 that attended Memorial in the mid 1920s. Well, I have information, or found information online, that was given in a court of law, so it must be somewhat accurate, because lying under oath is something that's you're really taking your chances, and there was no reason to lie under these circumstances. When the judge asked Norman Woodworth what the Bible students were, and he gave a synopsis of the movement, of the Dawn Bible Students movement, and said that in the mid to late 1940s, there were 56,000 Bible students. Now that's a pretty successful recovery from the because when they say 90,000 for the memorial, not all of those were consecrated Bible students. They attended memorial, but not all of them were consecrated Bible students. So if you say 75% of them might have been consecrated Bible students, the Dawn recouped probably the majority of disaffected, disenfranchised Bible students who either left the society, disassociated from the society, or were disfellowshipped from the society during the 20s and the 1930s. So we'll pick up around that point in time, the beginning of the Dawn, because the Dawn is actually the branch of the Bible students movement that I was raised within. My family was quite prominent in the Bible students movement in those days. My grandmother was Norman Woodworth's personal secretary for 25 years, and Norman Woodworth, first cousin to Clayton Woodworth, was the founder of the Dawn publications, and also very key, very responsible for the regathering work that took place in the 1930s and 40s of the Bible students. And so my family were pretty instrumental in that work. Eventually, my father became, I think he was the third managing editor of the Dawn publications during the 1980s. So yeah, my family was right at the center, heart of the Bible students movement, and as well as my extended family. I had quite a few of extended family members who were and are still prominent in the now existing Bible student movement. And by the way, just want to mention one last thing, that if anybody's interested, this month is the month that the Bible students hold their general convention. I believe it begins on a Friday night. Saturday, I think the 14th. I think it's a Saturday, the 14th of July. They have live feed of the convention, of the talks. So you get to see the different types of meetings. You get to see a testimony meeting. You get to hear a talk. Many people who heard my interview with Lloyd Evans, Faith versus Faith, Bible students, done a little more than a year ago. There were some clips that I had provided Lloyd from the General Convention, and it was interesting to see the response of many of the XJWs who found it very similar to their experience at attending a Jehovah's Witness convention. The only difference is that each of those brothers that got up and gave a talk devised that talk themselves. There was no central coordinating governing body writing out every talk. So that's a key difference. I don't know how anybody could stomach such a thing as 7 men, and knowing that the same talk is given by other people. Why not? Why don't the governing body just give the talks themselves and then pipe it in with a video? I mean, why have a person give something that is not their own? It just doesn't make sense to me. I would be, well, as a Bible student, I was bored out of my head anyway with the Bible student talks, but at least the talks were original, not parroting something that was given to me to read to the convention, basically. So anyway, this is Truth Seeker here, and now that I'm off of vacation, I won't make as many of these as frequently, so it probably won't be until next week when I get to the Bible students and talk from the 1930s onward about the Bible students movement. We'll leave the Watchtower behind, and we'll move forward with the Bible students movement Mach 2. If anybody understands Spinal Tap, the movie, there was Spinal Tap Mach 2. The Bible students, as they continued post-Watchtower, let's put it that way. Okay, so have a nice day, everybody. I wish you the best.